Welcome to a video in which we experience sun, rain, mountain roads, country lanes, a circuit used for F1 testing, and two variants of the same car in similar but not identical colours. Welcome to the launch of the new Megane RS. Let's start on the road, in some sunshine in a volcano orange car with a cooking sport chassis option.
First thing to say is it looks really good, I think. It's somewhere between the slightly almost bland, possibly boring look of a Golf GTI, very subdued, very you turn up anywhere in it, and the totally over-the-top crazy Civic Type R. It's somewhere in the middle, and you really notice the wider front and rear tracks on this car. So it's 60mm wider at the front and 45mm wider at the rear, and it sits on the road like one of those TCR cars. The engine is fairly standard sort of hot hatch fare, I suppose. 1.8 litres, 276 brake horsepower, 288 pounds-foot of torque. 0 to 60 miles an hour though is actually a very impressive 5.8 seconds. The engine sounds really good too. You've got the pops and crackles that are obligatory these days, but they don't feel overdone, don't feel too gratuitous, which is good. We've got two gearbox options, a manual, hurrah, we'll get to that in a bit, and then this EDC dual clutch box. It's not bad actually, it's really pretty good, but the paddles could just do with being a little bit longer, despite the fact you're not moving the wheel too much. They just need to drop down a bit more here. Also, I've never got quite why Renault seem to do this. They put Alcantara up here and leather down here. I know Alcantara doesn't last very long, but it would be nice if it was all the way around the wheel. The stitching too just cuts into your thumbs a bit. Small niggles, but perhaps important on a driver's car. Perhaps the biggest change with this new Megane is the fact that, well, it's actually going to be easier to live with. Just driving it around, it's fairly obvious that sort of in here it's all very habitable and nice. The seats are very nice, they grip you very well. But more importantly, the ride comfort. Renault has chosen to give this car hydraulic bump stops, which effectively are a damper within a damper. So I think that means you can actually soften off the main damper slightly more because you know it's not going to blow through that last lot and smash into the bump stops. What does that mean? Well, it means that it's just more comfortable every day. The Renault is always a great driver's car, wonderful if you were a driver, perfectly livable with, but the trouble is that passengers, your family, they weren't going to be your best friends by the end of the journey, because over bumps it did sort of move around quite a lot. There's that movement again.
Other tech that is new to this Megane includes the Multi-Reflector LED lighting system, which Renault claims is unique in the segment. Meanwhile, inside there is also the Multi-Sense system that lets you choose the demeanour of the car from comfort through normal to sport and race, and the latest version of the RS monitor, which displays a whole host of information gathered by sensors on the car. The perfo hubs that we've seen on previous generations also make a reappearance, but the biggest news is that this is now a hot hatch with 4-wheel steer. The idea, in case you've forgotten, is that in the faster corners the rear wheels steer in the same direction as the fronts, thereby effectively lengthening the wheelbase and increasing stability. But in tighter corners on more nudgety roads, the rear wheels steer in the opposite direction to the fronts, thereby shortening the wheelbase and increasing steering response by up to 20%, Renault says. The big news, however, with this Renault Sport car is the fact that normally the shortening of the wheelbase tends to stop at around about 50 km an hour or 30 miles an hour. In this car, however, there are two stages. In Sport, it will stop at 37 miles an hour, but put it into race, and that shortening of the wheelbase will continue all the way up to over 60 miles an hour. Sounds good to me. I think we should go and try it out up in the mountains.
So what does it feel like on a properly twisty bit of road that's been designed for? Well, you really can feel that rear wheel steer in action. It feels like a really small car, almost a bit sort of Mitsubishi Evo-like in the way that it gets into corners. The engine, well, it's adequate. It you never feel like you really want to rev it right out to the limit. You rely on all the torque in the mid-range. The gearbox is good. The brakes are fantastic as well. It's extraordinary when you do get into corners, and the way it helps means that you have very little steering lock to apply in corners. You never feel like you're even sort of getting the wheel through 90 degrees, to be honest. The steering feel, that makes it perhaps a little bit difficult to judge the grip of the tyres, but it's so precise that it doesn't matter too much. The one thing that you do miss though, because it gets into the corners so well, you then feel like you can get on the power really early, and that's when you feel like you just need better traction from the front. Luckily, as well as this sports chassis, there is also a Cup chassis, and that gets a Torsen limited slip diff. So I think we ought to go and try that out, really.
And not quite at the end of the rainbow, but somewhere just over it, was a pit lane full of golden yellow Meganes, equipped with this more focused Cup chassis. Serendipitous, I think you'll agree.
So welcome to something of a sort of voyage of discovery, really. We're at Jerez, where I have been before, but only to spectate. And we're in the Cup chassis version of the Megane, which I've never driven before. So the first thing to say, probably whilst I'm working out where on earth we go around here, is the differences with the Cup chassis. So we've got 10% stiffer suspension. Most importantly, we've got that Torsen diff, which, to be honest, in my mind, even before I've driven this car, means that it feels like it's going to be the one to have, because without it, it just felt traction limited on the exit of corners, really. And already through these ones, it just feels more precise. The other differences with this car is we've got the optional manual gearbox in here, and also, in fact, you get a manual handbrake in here as well. Now, we've put everything into race, so we get that rear wheel steer helping up to 62 miles an hour. It's really nice and flowing, this track, and the car feels like it flows as well. Of course, the one thing we can't really tell around here, because it is super smooth, I think it's been resurfaced even since I was here, is how well this car rides, obviously with that stiffer suspension. Those hydraulic bump stops should mean that it's a comfier car, even with a stiffer suspension. The other thing to mention, actually, I forgot to mention before, is that this car has the bimetallic brakes, so there's more aluminium in them, which makes them 1.8 kilos lighter per corner, which obviously helps the unsprung weight. In fact, again, should help that ride quality probably more on the road than you're going to notice on the track. It'll help on the track probably more with heat dissipation and actually, you know, not fading quite as much. It just feels really, really agile, this car. And there is the checkered flag.
Our time on the road and track might have been relatively brief, but it was certainly varied, and a few things were very evident. For starters, the switch to 5 doors and its undoubted increase in refinement will ensure that this third generation car is a bigger success for Renault Sport. To my eyes, it looks tremendous too, striking a perfect balance somewhere between anonymity and aero aggression. But what about those all-important hardcore RS dynamics? Well, I think the Cup chassis is essential, because a front-wheel drive hot hatch with 288 pounds-foot of torque has to have a limited slip diff. Even with the Cup chassis, I think this latest Megane has lost a little of its predecessor's purity and raw interactivity, but that four-wheel steer gives it tremendous agility and a very distinctive feel that I can't wait to sample again. Getting one on the same road as a Civic Type R and a Golf GTI should be very interesting indeed.
How could I forget? There is one other thing to mention. Whilst we're doing the cooling down lap, we're waiting for the person we overtook. There's a trophy version of this car coming, which will have even more power, 300 brake horsepower, I think. So, yes, this is not the summit. There's more to go.